Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining ASDC's Thursday Train to Win webinar. Today's topic is developing a fundraising plan, and we are really excited to have three great presenters that are going to share with you all some best practices and some strategy for developing fundraising plans for your state party. Before we jump in, just want to remind you of a few housekeeping items as we go through our webinar today. The first is that as an attendee to today's webinar, you are currently in listen-only mode, but if you do have a question during the course of the webinar, you can click the raise my hand icon, or you can type into the questions box, and we'll make sure that we get you unmuted and get your question read from the questions box and get it answered. Additionally, if you are tracking with us on social media, and we hope that you do, you are welcome to tweet at Dem Chairs, which is the Association of State Democratic Chairs. You can also tweet with our hashtag Train to Win, which is the name of our webinar series. You can also tweet at today's presenters, and their Twitter handles are listed there at the bottom of your screen. So please do track with us in social media today, as we know today will be a really great presentation. And just to go over briefly the agenda for today, after we finish our housekeeping items, I'll open up the presentation to our first set of presenters, Stephen Hanwork and Senator Karen Carter-Peterson from the Louisiana Democratic Party. They'll share with you some of their best practices and strategy, as well as Dave Mills, who's here at the DNC as a regional political director and is the former executive director for the Democratic Party of Virginia. He'll join to give a few insights and put a fine point on today's presentation. Between those two presentations, we will have Q&A. So feel free to type in the questions as the presentations go along. And at the end of each presentation, we will have time for you to ask questions, and we'll make sure that those questions get answered. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn the floor over to Stephen Hanwork, Executive Director of the Louisiana Democratic Party.
Thank you so much, Janae. Actually, Karen's going to get us kicked off.
All right. So thanks, Stephen, and certainly thank you, Janae, for setting this call up in the webinar. I'm excited to be on and invited. And certainly to our president of the ASDC, Chairman Buckley, for the great leadership that he's offered us and what he's just done as a mentor for me and certainly for Stephen as we've embarked upon this great goal of turning Louisiana from red to purple to blue. So I just want to be honest with everybody. At the onset of this call, while I have certainly been a candidate before and raised money as a former state representative, and also I ran for Congress, and I ran for office and serving as a state senator, I am in no way, shape, or form an expert, and I'm quite sure that many of you could teach me a thing or two, and so I look forward to the questions and comments at the end of the presentation that Stephen and I are about to give. But what Stephen and I thought would be helpful to do would be to share our short journey in the last 2 years with you all, and perhaps some of the things that we've done might inspire you and get you to thinking about recruiting investors for your mission and for your party. Many of you know that I was elected chair of the party in Louisiana about 2 years ago, and at that point we were largely treading water. Our party had only 3 full-time employees, not one of which was a fundraiser, and we had about $25,000 in the bank. I didn't know that when I signed up for this, by the way. And the donor pool had all but dried up. I mean, if you look at our list, it was like, you know, back in 2003, 2005, donors from way back when. We had SPP, which was certainly helping us to survive, but largely that is what the party was doing, just surviving. And so for those first few months, we were primarily focused on helping the president in his reelection effort. And by the end of 2012, Steve and I were just convinced that growing organically was simply not an option for us. And the school of hard knocks can, as you know, be a bit rough. And the folks who elected me wanted change, and they wanted it immediately. They didn't really have, there wasn't the time for me to kind of get my feet wet. So we had to jump in. So we did some big things real early. We took a leap of faith, and we hired Doug and Lauren, who many of you know from the group that was the organization known as Big Change Strategy. and it really, really paid off for us. And that was a lot of money. Now, I won't tell you for a minute that we did everything that they recommended, but it was certainly good to have some folks that had been in a lot of southern states and offered recommendations and had seen what we were about to experience, and we benefited from their expertise. But some of their suggestions just weren't in our nature, and others were not a good fit for Louisiana, where they'd seen it work maybe in Tennessee or in Florida. It just didn't work for us. However, most of what they suggested, we implemented in the plan that they offered and helped us devise. It worked, and we're in implementation phase right now. So before I turn this over to Stephen, who's going to kind of give you the nuts and bolts and get into the weeds, which he likes me to stay out of as the chair, I'll say, I want to point something out. Not that Doug and Lauren did for us, nothing that they did for us or items that they coached us on was real rocket science. The biggest thing that they gave us was clarity of thought. And it really challenged Stephen and I to look beyond the day-to-day and toward the party that we wanted to build long-term. And that's hard to do because you always got these fires you got to put out. And it forced us to take a look, really good look, long look at our own strengths and our own weaknesses. And it helped Stephen and I appreciate each other more because we could really look at our own, the challenges that we face, our personalities, and what made us tick and how we operated with our own time management skills and design. So lastly, it made us realize that each of us have these very unique roles to fulfill as chair and as ED. And one of our most important roles is serving as a support system for one another. And that's real important. So this process brought our leadership team a lot closer, and it allowed us to value the strengths that each of us brings to the table. And I know that every party is different, just as each chair and vice chair and ED is different. But having the friendship, the mutual respect for one another, the chair and the ED, it's really been key for us, and it makes the job that we do really enjoyable because we all get in this for the same reason. We want to win elections for Democrats, but we come to the table with different things. And so, I really am blessed and have the pleasure of a wonderful team that we've now built from 3, I'll say, to 14 full-time staffers in 2 years with great funding. And, nothing's ever easy. We're, hitting the phones and hitting it every day. But at this point, I'll let Stephen get into some of the weeds. And so with that, Stephen, handwork, please.
Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate it. Karen is right. When we walked in on day one, we realized very quickly that we had a lot of work to do. But the most productive work was finding normal with each other. We had to calibrate ourselves to each other. We had to find our footing. So I'll begin with what we had the day that we started. We had no other fundraising plan other than calling a small and a growing smaller list of faithful donors and ask them to give to us. So many of them would openly ask us, so when's payroll due? That clearly signified a huge issue to us. With 3 staff and not really any of them with a direct focus on fundraising, as the chairwoman said, that's always an item that was getting overlooked. We didn't take advantage of our national programs like Dollars for Democrats or the State Party Victory Fund, and sadly, we only had 10,000 email addresses in our database, which was a constant contact database, by the way, and none of them had names or even demographics associated with them. So here's what we did. Neither Karen nor I had ever run a state party before, but both of us had been on our state party executive committee for more than a decade. Both of us knew, but both of us knew people who had, and trust me, we utilized those friendships. I think many of you are actually on the call right now that we tapped to help us out. As Karen suggested, we knew enough to know that we couldn't do this by ourselves, and we didn't want to struggle. We wanted to leapfrog forward if at all possible. Enter Doug and Lauren. Regardless if you hire consultants or not, you can still do things that really matter. We started doing an honest internal SWOT analysis, which many of you probably know and understand. Through conducting a staff assessment and using early interviews with stakeholders, we went through our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, and our threats. This was unbelievably helpful. We can remember sitting together with Doug and Lauren in Park City, Utah in December of 2012 when we began this, and it was nothing short of eye-opening. We began to talk with our lapsed donors and other stakeholders. We built a large database and flagged the people that we had to talk to, and we specifically focused on making sure that we talked to the folks who were not initially supporters of the new regime, if you will. Therefore, it was very helpful having outside folks who nobody knew, who no one had any connections to, any of the previous leadership or whatnot, to actually conduct these interviews for us. We conducted 3 types of interviews: in person, over the phone, and online. In-person interviews really went to our top-level stakeholders, former and current elected officials, donors, and opinion shapers. Phone interviews were conducted with those that we couldn't get in front of, and we also included former staff members as well in this group. When all of the information started coming together, we then put together a 2-week online survey and coached all of our 10,000 people that we had email addresses for to actually give us a little bit more information. So I figured I'd break this down into these several small phases that we did, and I want to give you some pro tips. These are the suggestions that we have during each one of these phases. So pro tip for phase number 1, do not ask for money during this phase. Though, hello, accept it if they offer it to you, right? In person, if at all possible, especially for those who can potentially help you moving forward. Listen, ask open-ended questions, and then just sit back and let them talk. Allow them to vent. These might turn into therapy sessions, and that's quite all right, okay? Be sure to actively listen and then summarize for them what you're hearing from them. And then finally, ask probing and follow-up questions to dig into exactly what their real concern is. All that information was put together, and we found out some very meaningful things. This gave us a bit of a roadmap. We had people say things to us like, we're just dying for a party to fall in love with again, and you know what? It wouldn't take much. To also, you've got to hold these Republicans accountable. They're running off with everything that is dear to us. So the big takeaways that this gave us were people wanted a strong party and they were willing to invest in it, but they were tired of being told help is coming when nothing ever changed. They didn't want the party focusing on the 3 Gs, you know, gays, guns, and God. That was simply too divisive, even in loyal Democratic circles. They were nervous of the National Democratic Party brand. They wanted the party that would fight for core Democratic beliefs. A 24/7, 365-day-a-year war room mentality. And they wanted us to stop arguing D versus R arguments and instead frame our questions, frame our issues around wrong versus right. So what we did about what we learned was this. We reached out and built relationships with many of you on this call right now. The ASDC and the ASDED were and are huge assets to us and were immensely valuable in us moving forward. We built our blueprint for regaining a foothold here in Louisiana, a pathway that would build almost exactly what most of the respondents were telling us they wanted. We promoted our longest-serving employee, Michelle Brister, to Deputy Executive Director, both in a show of respect for the amazing work she does, and also most of our stakeholders know and trust her, but also because we wanted to show a strong commitment to honoring the past, all the while moving forward. We hired a rock star communications director that we lovingly stole from a Michigan Democratic Party, and we allowed her to build a true department. This dramatically improved our internal and external communications and our bandwidth. We focused then, like a laser, on the areas that our donors wanted us to focus on and invest our time, and that was in field and political, research and data, and in fundraising. So pro tips for this phase. We began implementing the plan before asking for a single penny. See, we knew that one of the complaints we had heard the loudest was the party always says they're going to do something, but then they never do it. We took the show on the road. Okay, we held briefings for stakeholders and allies. We built a really great crowds and very happy, interested folks that were interested in the fact that we were doing something and there was energy behind us. We enhanced and improved all fundraising programs. You know, you really must use an all-of-the-above approach when it comes to raising money. You know, a good example of this is the D4D program is now sending us all of the donor matched back to the voter file every single month that they're bringing in so that we can then add them to our internal communications. They're collecting email addresses for most of the people that they talk to, and that's certainly helping us build a relationship with those folks. That was a simple thing to do, although it did take a little bit of help from the ASDC to get it done, but it's something that's helping us right now. And then for any of you who have read or participated in any of Dr. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, we're constantly sharpening the saw. We're constantly going back, reevaluating what we're doing. Is it having the desired results that we want? But one of the most important things that we found here is that the blueprint continues to be a driving force in helping us focus on what's really important. And it helps us stay focused on that pathway forward. We can actually go to folks and put it out in front of them and say, see, that's not in our plan. So we have to kind of stay focused on what our plan is. By building this out, the plan, it was easy then to assign costs to the plan. This gave us a very easy segue to get back to these stakeholders and say, you know what, we heard you, we're doing what you asked, but you know what, it's going to cost money. We need your help now to continue a plan and to meet our benchmarks. The biggest thing here is we had a fully thought out and well-planned blueprint for how we were going to move our party forward and our state forward. We clearly have an advantage of sorts in that this midterm, our senior U.S. Senator, Mary Landrieu, is on the ballot just after taking the gavel of the powerful Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Make no mistake, that certainly helps us. But with building early, as we did, that was a hard sell. People are not used to that. But we were able to do it. When the results started showing up, that's when folks really got interested, and selling our plan got much easier. This full blueprint will be available via Jonay's recap that she sends out afterwards, so you'll all be able to see it. With that, though, I'm going to pass it back to my chairwoman and my friend, Karen.
Thank you, Stephen, and certainly I hope that was enlightening for you guys. But what I'd like to do now is that maybe share with you some of the things that we learned that were unexpected. As all of you know, state parties and the operations there too are not like campaigns. We are here after the campaign and on to the next campaign, and we wanted to make sure that we built something that was sustainable. When I'm gone and Stephen's gone, if that ever occurs, we certainly want the next folks in our places to have something to build upon. And so because of that, campaign norms don't apply, and the money that we bring in needs to go to work for us immediately. And that can be done in 2 ways: to build up capacity for an income, an upcoming cycle, or secondly, to be stockpiled to get you through right after big elections when donors are hard to find. So simply said, when campaigns are raising and stockpiling, we are spending as state parties, and when campaigns are spending, we are stockpiling. For example, we go fundraising dark at the end of the quarter. You will not see any fundraising emails going out from us from now until April the 1st. There is no need for us to try to compete with everyone else. We will take another stab really hard at it after the 1st. And secondly, and perhaps most importantly, donors today are very, very different than they were just 4 years ago. They're more sophisticated, for sure, and the other thing is they want to see something tangible. So along with our blueprint, we typically take a one-pager of recent results and headlines and new hires and so forth and promote that. Lastly, I will close with this. Having a plan has immensely helped us to deliver to our stakeholders the following results. We've almost tripled the fundraising totals from any previous off-election year, bringing in over $1.1 million in 2013. That was the best off-year Louisiana Democratic Party has ever had in the past. And then the highest was $420,000, and we did $1.1 million. We also now have a full-time permanent staff of, as I mentioned earlier, 14. and we have been able to largely float the expenses for the new coordinated staff and gearing up to help Senator Landrieu, which is totally unprecedented. So we're blowing away the state GOP with our activists that we have developed, and we call those folks the Blue Dats. I know y'all know about Blue Dats from the Saints and others. But we developed a team called Blue Dats, and the GOP's Go Reds are completely flat-footed in the social media and activist engagement. We built this Blue Dat grassroots activist team based on what we saw with President Obama and OSA, and it has been phenomenal. The other thing we have is a new finance director that has hit the ground running, and his name is Jesse, and he just started this week. We are aggressively attacking our plan that is calling for well over $6.5 million to run the party this year. And certainly much of that will come through our national allies. Almost a third of that is our portion, and we will exceed that goal. That is our goal, and we don't fall short of goals at the Louisiana Democratic Party. So we're going to do what we need to do. Fifth thing is we are aggressively working with the DNC, the DSCC, and vendors to make the strongest voter file with the modeling and data that our candidates need to win. I mention all of these things because those were the things that our stakeholders asked for in the plan that we developed, and we message on that consistently so that each person feels like their voice was heard, and that it's something that is consistently showing us to be valuable and really basic, but also profitable. The communications, the external communications with just all stakeholders, particularly donors, that has been the most phenomenal piece of this whole thing. They see and hear regularly from their party, they're our clients, and they're excited about having their voice first having been listened to, but then having that translate into real action and the kind of messaging being responsive to what we heard. So I want to just thank everybody for listening to our story, and Stephen and I would certainly be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karen and Stephen. If you have any questions for them, you're welcome to type them into the questions box, or you can click the raise my hand icon, and we'll make sure that we get you unmuted and get your question asked. We do have one question that just popped up. Karen or Stephen can answer, but the question is, how often is Chairwoman in the office, and how does that play a role in how you all are able to kind of build your programs and roll out different programs?
Maybe I'd like to see how she's going to answer this first.
It's going to be the same answer. I'm not always physically in the office, but if the question is specifically how often is she in the office to do call time, or how often is she in the office just physically in the office with the staff. And so I'll try to answer both. Stephen has me coming to the executive staff meetings on Monday mornings as of late, and I'm not there because of the other roles that I have. I'm a lawyer, I'm a senator, and so I'm not there. I'm not a full-time chair, as you may have in many of your states. But the other thing that is of great benefit is that I have complete confidence in my executive director, and I've told many stakeholders, and sometimes I need to repeat that to stakeholders, that when Stephen speaks, he can speak for me. We have, I don't know if it's unique, but it's certainly fruitful, a relationship where, we are absolutely on the same page. Senator Landrieu, our lead Democrat in the state, respects that. Stephen will talk regularly to her campaign manager, to her chief of staff, and that's like, me and Senator Landrieu talking. And so there's no misstep, and there's ongoing communication through email and text all day long, even though I might not physically be present. But we're trying to at least have me routinely in the office for senior staff meetings at minimum once a week. But I am always available, and there's constant contact, no less than 10 to 15 times a day with me and Stephen. On the finance side, we have scheduled call time for me to make my donor calls to raise money. And Stephen, you may want to add to that.
Yeah, and we're doing really good with that as well. We're able to easily complete a minimum of 6 hours a week in various different increments now with Karen's schedule. So that's working out really well for us. And one of the things that we also joke about is, a lot of people kind of have a hard time in some ways keeping up with us because Karen and I frequently are texting at 5 a.m. and also sometimes at 1 a.m. So we're constantly in communication with us. And more than anything, as an executive director, I have to tell you, that means the world to me. Knowing that I've got somebody that first I can vent to when I need to, but also to someone who has kind of got my back, and that we're really well calibrated with each other. So that's probably a long way of answering that question, but certainly in the office, interacting with staff at senior staff meetings on Mondays is a great help, and then doing that call time throughout the week at a minimum of 6 hours each week is amazingly helpful to us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen and Karen. The next question is, how do you assess your progress to goal? So you, of course, set certain metrics for measuring how effective your fundraising program is going. What are the progress to goal metrics that you set, and how do you measure them?
Sure, that's really good because, as I mentioned in there, we're constantly sharpening the saw. So that's an ever-evolving metric, correct? Because as we get as we exceed in certain areas and we fall behind in others, we're constantly tweaking those to be realistic, learning the ebbs and flows of when money comes in. But I guess we're constantly looking at that, and we're reevaluating, so it's almost like we do it daily. And I know that might sound kind of intense, but how do we measure the progress to goals? It's really basic. Do we have money for payroll? I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to in some cases. One of the things that the chairwoman mentioned earlier when she was speaking was, we see this incredibly important for us right now is that we are raising money and we are spending it immediately. When we have a new donor come in that we've been chasing and they come through for us and they come in with a big check, we immediately put that to work for us by probably hiring a new staff person and getting them out there on the ground. That's our role right now. And so that's kind of how we're calibrating ourselves. But one of the other things is my senior staff will every week give us reports on their progress to goals, and that is really helpful. We don't have silos in the LDP anymore where comms doesn't talk to finance and finance doesn't talk to operations and operations doesn't talk to field. We all talk with each other because all of our departments overlapped in one way or another. So that way we hold each other accountable, so it's more of a team environment. So hopefully that was helpful.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. We have another question here in our questions box. The question is, what party principals, if any, do call time for or with the party?
Sure. I can jump in on that, and I know Karen will also weigh in. We've been really successful in obviously our chairwoman, myself, and our finance person making calls. But also our first vice chair, Shane Riddle, does an amazing job for us in his avenues. But also we have several members of our executive committee that do a really good job. We are lucky, I suppose, to have a vice chair of elected officials. He is a state representative himself, and so he's been doing a really good job in connecting with all of those elected officials throughout the state. So those are our main principals that are making calls for us and doing actual scheduled call time every week. Others are doing probably more that are around events, but those are the people who are doing regular scheduled call time for us and who we then staff.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly to that, Janae, and thanks for the question. It's very difficult. We've got 210 members of our Democratic State Central Committee, and notwithstanding the fact that every meeting I beg of them to get involved with fundraising, and I've set goals for the executive committee. I've asked them to do low donor events to host, and that the staff will support them in arranging those events in their area of the state. in their district. It's very, very difficult to get folks that have actually run for these offices to help us raise the money. I don't know if it's just, the culture and folks expect that the chair of the party and the ED and whoever gets hired are going to do most of the fundraising. But I have been working diligently for the last 2 years to try to change that mindset. And as Stephen mentioned, we have some members who have, but what I find is we have to stay on top of the members to give them tools because they don't know how to fundraise. They don't, they need this webinar as well. And so we're doing things within the state to share with them tools on how they can do it within their districts. And so it's a challenge. It's something that is continuing to grow, but we're better off than we were 2 years ago, and we have more troops on the ground making the calls and doing donor visits.
Awesome. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Stephen. If you have any additional questions, feel free to type them in the questions box. We'll make sure we get them read out and get you unmuted if you have a question. We are going to transition, and just Dave Mills from DNC is going to give a few kind of fine points on kind of this presentation, as well as some broader fundraising tactics that will work in the states and have been kind of shown and proven to work, and so he's going to share those with you, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to him.
Hey guys, good afternoon. When I heard that Stephen and Karen were going to be working on this presentation and kind of telling you the story of what they've done so incredibly well in Louisiana, I just wanted to jump on at the end and just emphasize a couple of things from the perspective of someone who is was an executive director, and now in my role as the Southern political director for the DNC, I'm looking at primarily 13 state parties in the South with sort of varying degrees of fundraising activity, different challenges, different obstacles, different strengths and weaknesses. And what I wanted to start with is just sort of highlighting a few of the really important points that I think Stephen and Karen really took to heart when they started to turn the fundraising picture around for Louisiana, and emphasize to you that these are absolutely, what Stephen and Karen just laid out for you, are absolutely scalable, customizable, achievable goals for every state party. You can make a version of what they did in Louisiana work for you in your state party. So I really want to get to your questions, but let me just kind of touch on a couple of quick things that they did. The first is making sure you're using every tool in your tool bag, in your toolkit as a state party, as a revenue generating state party. What are your revenue streams, and what are you doing in each of those areas to maximize the turnaround and maximize the output from those streams? So whether it be call time, meetings, events, mail, email, phones, or any other fundraising tool you're using, what are you doing to really get down and make sure you kind of bore down and make sure that each of those is being used? And I would challenge most of the state parties on the call that if you really do the analysis that Stephen and Karen did in Louisiana, you will find that you are underutilizing at least one of those tools. And to the extent that you have questions when you identify those sort of underutilized areas, to the extent that you have questions about how to increase output from those areas, there are a wide variety of folks that are very eager to help, myself included, and certainly authorities on a state party turnaround like Karen and Stephen are eager to get your questions, eager to help, just as folks were eager when Karen and Stephen started out to get answers themselves. They found a lot of folks willing to talk to them about it. We're all still here. There are folks at the DNC experienced in this, at the ASDC experienced in this, and certainly out in the states. So take a look at every tool in your toolkit, take a page out of Louisiana's book, and ask yourself, where can we improve? The second is balancing, this is so important, balancing donor cultivation and motivation. it really is a sign, a huge red flag for any fundraising operation when all you do is ask for money. And when you really start thinking about the culture of your own fundraising program, whether it's your call time, your mail, your email program, how often are you communicating with the people in your Democratic community that could give you money, and you aren't asking for a contribution? Maybe you're asking them for another action. But I think this is something, just watching the email program from Louisiana specifically, something they're doing so well is balancing the, hey, the roof is on fire, send us money, the Republicans are crazy, send us money emails, with join us for this event, take action by calling this legislator, sign this petition, stand with us on this, learn more about this, and having a wide variety of ways that every individual can get involved in your party. And you really need to work on that. Nothing could be more important in terms of balancing that cultivation and motivation with asks than your call time program. As they mentioned, it's such a huge red flag if all your chair or all your finance director or all you as executive directors do is call folks and say, hey, we need money, hey, we need money, hey, we need money. You find you'll run out of donors and people who take your calls really fast. You want to make sure that you're giving people an opportunity to do a lot more than just write a check. And it's a way to sort of organically improve, I think, all aspects of party operations if you're really getting the most out of everyone. Everyone is partly a donor, but also potentially a surrogate, potentially someone who can in-kind of service to you. They're a voter, they're a volunteer, they're a house party host. There's so much to an individual, and to the extent your program gets all of those things out of someone, that balance is so key for a sustainable program over time. And state parties have a burden that campaigns simply don't have, which is that we have to exist year in and year out, have to appeal to people and ask them to do things for us year in and year out, cycle in, win, lose, cycle out. And so while campaigns can afford that sort of slash and burn at the end, state parties, have to constantly be thinking about that balance. And that's something else I think Stephen and Karen deserve a lot of credit for. And finally, and this is a big one, is listen. You may have, and I'm positive so many of you on the call do have, a vision for what you think your state party should look like, how many staff you need, what those staff need to be doing. But don't be afraid to listen to what people say they will support financially and adapt your plan to achieve new goals and to grow the party in a way that makes it appealing to folks who are willing to write checks. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to give up your whole sort of strategic plan, but it does mean sort of open your ears to fundraising possibilities and organizational growth opportunities that you might not have thought about at the outset, but that by listening to your donors, listening to party leaders, you're learning and growing the party over time. And what Louisiana has done to build out a regional field and political program, before there was ever coordinated on the ground, I think is an excellent example of this, where as they went out into the community, talked to their leadership, talked to donors and prospective donors, what they found was a frustration that the party wasn't reaching all corners of the state, that they weren't organizing year in and year out, they weren't engaging volunteers year in and year out, and a lot of lists were degrading, people were walking away from the party, people didn't feel engaged or empowered, and they were able to fundraise in part so well, I think, in part because they made it a specific part of their program that they would expand the party's reach to every corner of Louisiana, and they've done it. And I think it's it's such an undervalued trait especially when you're trying to raise money from individuals, is when you're sitting across the table from them, you're on the phone from them, don't be afraid to ask questions and just listen, and be prepared to adapt your plan if new opportunities emerge as you're on that listening tour. And And so with that, I want to just also kind of chime in and thank Karen and Stephen, one, for their leadership, two, for the sort of the model that they're building for a turnaround state party in Louisiana, the excellent work they're doing. And with that, let's take some questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Dave, and thanks again to Karen and to Stephen for joining us on today's webinar. If you have questions, again, you can type them into the questions box, or you can click the raise my hand icon, and we'll make sure we'll get your questions answered and get you unmuted if need be. In the meantime, I also did want to say thank you all for joining in case people have to hop off. We do really appreciate you guys leaning into today's presentation. You'll get an evaluation that will come to your inbox here shortly to thank you for joining this webinar today, but it will also have a link to the Louisiana Democratic Party's strategic blueprint that Stephen alluded to earlier. It'll have a copy there for you to download if you want to take a look at it, and it also has contact information for Stephen and his team in the event that you want to reach out and ask questions about it. So that resource will be available to you to take advantage of. So seeing no additional questions in our questions box, I want to thank Senator Karen Carter-Peterson, Chairwoman for Louisiana Democratic Party, as well as Stephen Hanwork, Executive Director at the Louisiana Democratic Party. Additionally, Dave Mills here at the DNC Regional Political Director for their time and sharing some best practices and strategy around building fundraising programs. I really hope that you found this to be helpful. Thank you, and we'll talk to you again on next week's webinar.